Brady girls. We are the Brady girls. We know our manners, we spend our tanners.
My name is Rosalind Gold, and I was born in 1942 at Hampton Court, in the town, not the palace, but moved directly from there once we were out of hospital, straight into my parents' flat in the East End. It was unusual because it was called Gwyn House. It still is called Gwyn House. It's still there. It's in the 1930s, the mid-30s, and it's a small block of flats, very much in a sort of modernist, Bauhausy kind of tradition. So it was very unusual for the East End. And when it was built, it was described as an oasis in the East End because it had constant hot water and central heating. And the central heating consisted of one little radiator in the sitting room and a heated bath rail, towel rail. So compared with a lot of places, it was very, very modern. And we lived on the ground floor in a little two-bedroom flat, which is where I grew up and lived all my life. Well, for the first 27 years, I think. Mummy was born in the East End, in Brick Lane, and her parents had been refugees from the Ukraine, which was then part of Russia, and they'd come over in the very late 1890s, the early 1900s, the turn of the century. And she and her brothers and sisters were all East Enders. Mummy's father was a furniture maker, and they were unusual in Brick Lane because they had a whole house to themselves. They occupied a whole house, which was considered really incredible, because most people were living in very small, cramped accommodation. My father's family, Daddy was born in Warsaw in 1909, and when he was about 3 weeks old, they ran for their lives. They just left because of threats of pogroms and things, and ended up, they settled in Belgium, where they were until the First World War broke out, and then when Germany invaded Belgium with a lot of Belgian people, they refugeed in London and were there until after the war, and then went back to Antwerp. They'd settled in Antwerp. Daddy came back to London later. His father actually had a small dairy in Antwerp. They were a Yiddish-speaking family. Also, my mother's side of the family were a Yiddish-speaking family. Dad's father acted as prompt in a Yiddish theatre in Antwerp, and that's how Daddy's interest in Yiddish theatre started. And he made his debut in London at a very, very early age, at about 7, as a child actor. But then eventually they went back to Antwerp, and then he came back before the Second World War and was in Yiddish theatre here. There were at least 3 going. He hovered between the Grand Palais and the Adler Hall in Adler Street off Commercial Road. The Grand Palais was also in the Commercial Road. I met my mother in about 1937 when they married. He'd learnt to be a diamond cutter in Antwerp, and he was doing that sort of thing in Hatton Garden as well, and being a bit of trading. But times were not very easy, Nobody had a lot of money. She was a good seamstress, but I don't think she worked much after they married until later on. Her mother had plans for her because she was quite bright. She said she wanted to send her to Pitman's to be a secretary because she thought that would be a nice thing for her. But very sadly, my mother's parents died when Mum was very young, and she was an orphan by the time she was 14. And she and her younger brother, who were the 2 babies of the family, sort of lived between various brothers and sisters until they were old enough to fend for themselves. The family was very involved in Jewish cultural life generally, and we led a very sort of what then was a normal Jewish life. Mummy kept kosher, and we never mixed milk and meat. She shopped at Jewish butchers and Jewish bakers, which were, there was a lot of them then. Fruit and veg and what have you on Whitechapel Market. We belonged to the nearby synagogue at Nelson Street, which I still belong to. We observed all the high days and holidays. We didn't go to synagogue regularly on a Saturday, but Yom Kippur we observed very strictly. And once we came home from Kol Nidre, the night of Yom Kippur, the eve, and having been in synagogue, we came home and we just sat around chatting. And when it became dusk and dark, we simply went to bed because we didn't switch on lights or listen to the radio or watch television on that night of the year. We were very embedded in the social life and cultural life of the East End, very much part of it. The family was quite well known because of Dad and his popularity during the war years of the plays that he was doing. From what I gather, he was called up, because he still had Polish citizenship, he was called up by the Polish army, and he more or less said, I'm not fighting for them, and volunteered and joined up with the British army. And this was while he was appearing in The King of Lampedusa, which was the great Yiddish theatre hit of the war years. In March of '44, when he got called up, he then, volunteered and joined the British army, and was in the war until after VJ Day. I think he was demobbed in September, October of '45. As a youngster growing up, the East End was a happy place. There was a lot going on. There were clubs for young people all over the show. There were activities, but it was a very vibrant place. Even then, the community was starting to mix in with other communities. Among the most extraordinary things were, of course, it was littered with bomb sites, which were the greatest adventure playgrounds ever invented. So despite being warned, all our parents said, don't go on the bomb site. We would go, can Rosalind come out to play? Yes, don't you go on the bomb site. And there we were, all off climbing around. And I once fell into the hearth of a ruined house where the chimney had come down, and I came home covered in old soot, which went down very well. But that's it, people knew each other, neighbours knew each other. And I had friends in all the little streets around. It was where I lived, particularly by the side of the London Hospital. There were many terraces which were Georgian, which I loved. So it was a vibrant place, and we all seemed to know each other. And when Daddy took British citizenship in about 48, and changed the name from Goldberg to Gold. I mean, I was born a Goldberg, that's on my birth certificate. For decades afterwards, neighbours would call my mother Mrs. Goldberg, which was rather sweet. And people knew each other because families lived near each other, but then gradually people moved away. But my parents stayed, never left till they died. I think because most young people that I know went to clubs. It was something that you did as an after-school activity. And it was, I loved it. And it was a terrific change for all sorts of reasons. From, for instance, what happened at school. You were always having to do exams and tests, and I especially was always in trouble for chattering or being too lively or forgetting my gym shoes or having the wrong colour hair ribbon or, the wrong colour socks. Believe me, it happened. You were not in trouble at Brady. You were sort of there to join in activities and enjoy yourself. And nobody was telling you off or giving you a detention or writing in your record book. The other thing that I particularly liked, and it was especially true when on weekends down at Skeet, because I was an only child, I had no siblings to interact with. I had cousins, but at home it was just mum, dad and me. So it gave me a chance to interact with other young people in an environment that wasn't school. I mean, my primary school had been mixed, But I went to a grammar school that was separated boys and girls. I was Central Foundation Grammar School for girls. So it was a chance to interact with boys and girls in a way that I didn't get at home, other than with my cousins, which, you know, is not all the time. So that was, and the chance to do other things, you know, other than take exams or SWAT. I seem to remember the leader of the club when I was there was Miss Benjamin. I don't remember an awful lot, other than that she was very nice and encouraging. I think that's the important thing about all the Brady leaders and team leaders and project leaders. They were all very encouraging and sympathetic and empathetic. And that contrasted so strongly with school. It was just amazing. It was lovely. It was lovely. It was like being part of another family. The sort of activities I liked to join in with were particularly drama, which I did, a bit of art, a bit of, I was not sporty. I didn't take part in any sport, and I didn't go to camp. It wouldn't get me under canvas, thank you very much. But I did go to skeet, which I adored for various reasons. And I went on holiday once with the club to Switzerland in 1958 to Oberhofen, where we stayed in a youth hostel. And then the thing that we all enjoyed, and that it came as a sort of reward, they had these regular socials where you danced. It was a dance, and you danced either mostly to records, but every now and again they'd have a live band, and that was very exciting. It was the dancing that we loved. But it was before any of those British bands came up, like the Beatles or the Stones or anything. It was before then. Skeet was very special. For a start, the house was a wonderful Tudor survival in the heart of Kent. I love old architecture, and I did then, and it just enthralled me to be somewhere, staying in somewhere so old. I absolutely loved it. I liked the activities we did, like picking potatoes, doing things to help survive, joining in cooking and preparing things, and sitting round the fire in the lounge having discussions, going for walks in the country. It was lovely, and that's something I wouldn't otherwise have done. With holidays or with my parents, we either went to the seaside, like Westcliff, Southend, or we went abroad. But we didn't go to the countryside in England. So it was lovely to be in the country and be doing those country things. It was an introduction to a different way of life, which I liked very much. It was also a huge contrast to being at home with your parents, with all that babble of talk and singing and gossip and rowing and whatever was happening. It was a complete contrast. So whenever I returned home from skeet, it suddenly seemed very quiet. But it wasn't really, it just was a contrast, you know, being in a house where you're the only youngster, or being in the house where there met dozens. Of course, at skeet we had various leaders with us, and I particularly remember Yogi, who was with us picking potatoes, encouraging us to do all sorts of things, leading discussions. I remember the visit to Lullingstone Roman Villa, which was extremely exciting. Well, it was for me anyway, because I like archaeology, and seeing the wonderful mosaics that have been discovered there, that kind of thing that happened. And Yogi was just terrific. He was a fantastic man, and he was the leader. He took us to Switzerland. And that holiday was in 1958, and I went with the club to Switzerland. For a lot of the people, for a lot of my friends on that trip, it was their first trip abroad, but I'd been going abroad since I was about 5, when we were going backwards and forwards to Belgium and to France. It was the first time I'd been abroad with a group of youngsters like that, and it was lovely. It was lovely, and Yogi was fantastic. And we did all sorts of marvellous things. We went rock scrambling and hiking and walking and scrambled about on a glacier and did a lot of our own cooking. I remember we were doing watercolours. We were painting in watercolours, which Yogi encouraged us to do. I remember painting a view from the shore across Lake Thun. And Yogi was very encouraging, giving us all little tips and showing us how to make little houses stand out. He was amazing, but he was also incredibly personally kind to me, because I had just sat my O-levels, and my O-level results came back, my parents sent them on to me while I was in Switzerland, and I was terribly upset because I didn't do well at all, failed a lot, even of subjects that I loved. I was a very, very nervous exam taker, and I was in tears. I was absolutely crying my eyes out. I remember Yogi putting his arms around me and comforting me and saying not to worry, and often the girls' teachers aren't as good as the boys' teachers, and things like that. And you can resit them, don't worry about it, you're going to be fine. I mean, he was really an angel, because I was very distressed. And he was absolutely right, because later on I did resits and ended up at university. I think all my experiences at the club were memorable, and I'm not sure that I can put one above another. I think taking part in the play Angels at War was one thing. Actually winning a prize, getting first prize in a talent competition, playing the piano at the club when I was 14 was amazing, because one of the only prizes I ever won in my life. That was lovely, and Skeet was marvellous, and Switzerland was marvellous. And in between, joined it all up. So I can't say, it's impossible for me to say which of those was the most extraordinary, because they were all extraordinary. And I look back on all of it with enormous affection, you know, for what was given to us as youngsters to have those experiences in what was still a war-ravaged country. The legacy for me, I suppose, was of the experiences it gave me, which I carried forward into later life. I think if it hadn't existed, or if I hadn't gone to it, my teen years would have been lonelier. It would have been a lonelier existence.
We are the Brady girls. We are the Brady girls. We know our manners. We spend our tanners. We are respected.